They came from the void, indifferent and eternal. No fanfare, no introductions. One moment the skies were empty, the next, a silent fleet hung above Earth, colossal, angular ships that hummed with unnatural stillness. They did not speak, only transmitted coordinates and terms. Earth surrendered in 13 days. The Zarkith Dominion was the first. Cold-blooded creatures of obsidian skin and hive thought, their emissaries arrived cloaked in contempt. They declared Earth neither threat nor curiosity. Just function. The Krell ascendancy followed, biological perfectionists who found humanity's chaotic genetics repulsive but potentially useful. Then came the Ulian consensus, beings of pure energy housed in crystalline vessels, who deemed humans too primitive to even classify. Their council vote was swift and absolute. Subthought species designation. That term changed everything. Not even slaves. Livestock. Humanity was stripped of rights, identity, and future. Major cities became extraction hubs. Culture was catalogued and erased. History rewritten. Language compressed into utilitarian symbols. Art was reduced to fragments in archives no one accessed. The old flags were burned. Religions outlawed. Earth became Zone 448, a resource world producing raw labor and refined elements for wars beyond its stars. But humans didn't scream. Not in the way their conquerors expected. There were no riots. No great last stands. Just silence. Watchfulness. They adapted with unnerving speed. In the ruins of New York, families learned alien protocols and codes. In the hollowed Andes, they memorized star maps by hand. Children whispered the names of lost cities in guarded tones. A new language emerged, silent gestures, coded glances, fragmented stories shared under surveillance. The empires saw obedience. They failed to see memory. In their arrogance, they ignored what couldn't be measured. Defiance without motion. Rage beneath silence. Will forged in grief. They dismissed human resilience as compliance. Their projections failed to account for culture that clung to life like roots in scorched soil. The triumvirate enforced order through spectacle. Every cycle, a city vanished. Los Angeles, consumed in a beam of dark light. Istanbul, turned to black glass. No justification. No warning. The message was pure: remember your place. And humanity did. They remembered with precision. Underground shelters recorded each eradicated city in etched timelines. Disappeared places were renamed in code. The list lengthened. So did their patience. Children born under occupation never saw the oceans or the stars. Only artificial skies, processed rations, and the electric pulse of obedience collars. But they learned quickly. How to move without notice. How to conceal intent beneath routine. How to wear submission like a mask. They mapped the patrol routes and the patterns. They studied alien machinery with silent eyes. They were not raised with lullabies but with the sound of drones passing overhead. Still, no resistance rose. Not from cowardice. From calculation. They knew their history. The revolts that screamed too early died unseen. Earth chose instead the long silence. Information became their arsenal. Every detail remembered, every error recorded, every system quietly undermined. Generations trained in the dark, not with weapons but with memory, with intent, with the ability to think without showing it. They learned to survive not just as bodies, but as signals waiting to be sent. The empires called it stability. Among the Krell, a whisper passed through data chains: anomaly persistence. In the Zarkith analysis hubs, a line appeared in the margins of reports: conformity deviates from predicted decay curve. And within the Ulian archives, a flicker of uncertainty: behavioral consistency at odds with species class. It was already too late. Humanity had learned what mattered most. That victory does not begin with weapons. It begins with endurance. With memory. With silence so deep it begins to hum. Their world was taken. Their names were buried. Their sky was no longer theirs. But they still had one another. And they remembered. Above, the stars still pulsed with the weight of empires. But in the collapsed tunnels beneath Tokyo, a boy leaned into the dark and spoke a name he was never taught. Across the rubble, another voice replied. It began with a whisper moving through the ruins of old cities. Not in words, but in patterns, changes in posture, rhythm in work routines, tools left in precise positions. Communication without language. Earth was still under occupation, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. The silence no longer meant submission. It meant preparation. The first coordinated act was not violent. A logistics network used by the Krell collapsed for 6 hours. No alarms were triggered. No suspects were found. Shipments vanished. The official report blamed system decay. Unofficially, whispers spread among human labor groups about a missing engineer who fixed something before disappearing into the tunnels beneath Prague. That name, never spoken again, marked the true beginning of the Ember Pact. The Ember Pact wasn't an organization. It had no face, no location, no hierarchy. It existed as a behavior. Individuals acting alone but aligned by purpose. From the ashes of broken cities, knowledge was passed in code. Old world engineers taught signal interference to teenagers digging mineral shafts. Linguists embedded hidden data and maintenance requests. Every act was quiet, reversible, deniable. But each pushed the edge further. Testing reach, testing risk. A new generation came of age in shadow. They weren't taught to fight. They were taught to endure with intent. Everything had meaning: how a wrench was placed, the angle of a gaze, even the exact time someone left a workstation. Messages passed under the noses of their captors, hidden in compliance. Humanity's greatest weapon became the one thing the empires couldn't process: pattern disruption inside apparent order. They learned how to exploit alien blind spots. Krell surveillance depended on emotional indicators. Humans learned to flatten their effect. Zarkith drones monitored movement variants. Humans practiced identical gait routines. The aliens could read data patterns across entire cities but failed to comprehend metaphor. So humans used stories. Fables, songs, and forgotten rituals repurposed to move information. A lullaby might carry supply routes. A prayer could be a map. What emerged was not rebellion. It was infrastructure. Beneath the official systems, humans built their own. Power siphoned in microbursts, data lines rerouted, small caches of tools hidden in abandoned ducts. Not weapons yet. Tools for the future. They weren't preparing for a battle. They were designing the moment before battle. The foundation of rupture. The first deliberate sabotage was a test. A mining crawler in Antarctica collapsed into a fissure created by controlled thermal pulses. No casualties, no evidence. The Dominion called it a geological failure. But among human enclaves, the event was named Operation First Flame. A signal that the Ember had caught. Alien intelligence agencies began to notice statistical anomalies. Productivity dips that followed no pattern, infrastructure stress with no obvious cause. Human compliance remained total. Their movements matched expectation models. Their speech stayed within regulated syntax. But something wasn't right. A networked warning was dispatched among the alien intelligence sectors, low-tier anomalies escalating at scale. Recommendation: increased observation. Not intervention, just observation. That hesitation would cost them. By this point, the Pact had begun to simulate alien systems in secret. Human minds, trained from childhood in mimicry and decoding, reconstructed the architecture of alien AI, learned its rhythms, mapped its flaws. They didn't need to match the alien's power. They just needed to understand its limits. And in that gap, they found opportunity. The first real strike was bloodless. A Zarkith communications array rerouted its own data stream for 12 minutes. In those 12 minutes, every unit in Southeast Asia received a ghost signal, a human voice reading a single line from a forgotten war journal. It ended with a phrase that would become the Pact's signature. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. You forgot what we are. The transmission was traced to a maintenance node in the ruins of Bangalore. It was already melted by the time they arrived. The team responsible was never found. The Zarkith Command Center issued a silence directive. No broadcasts. No mention of the anomaly. They hoped containment would erase momentum. It didn't. The signal spread, copied by hand, burned into walls, scrawled on stolen packaging. It was repeated in whispers, encoded into work reports, hummed during labor. It was no longer a message. It was identity. The ember had grown teeth. The fracture came not from a grand event but from a silent chain reaction. In the orbit of Mars, a refueling station blinked out of existence. The Dominion attributed it to a reactor malfunction. 2 weeks later, a Krell data fortress in the Himalayas lost internal coherence, an algorithmic implosion with no discernible entry point. The aliens remained quiet, but their observation frequency doubled. Something was moving beneath their awareness, not as an army but as a sequence of precise collapses. Human actions escalated in complexity. They no longer just disrupted, they redirected. A shipment of plasma cores meant for a triumvirate dreadnought arrived at a derelict station and vanished. Orbital traffic rerouted through zones under human maintenance began showing navigational glitches. Aliens dismissed it as systemic decay from overuse. But in truth, every glitch was mapped, designed, exploited. The Pact's mastery of alien systems had reached parity in one domain: information warfare. They couldn't yet match alien firepower, but they could disorient, confuse, and mislead. Deception became doctrine. Artificial anomalies planted within communications forced triumvirate forces to chase false signals. Phantom fleets. Illusory resource spikes. The empires spent more and more effort suppressing threats that didn't exist, while real preparations advanced unnoticed. Humanity had achieved the impossible: control of perception. The occupiers still held the skies and the weapons, but they no longer controlled the narrative. That power had shifted, subtly and irrevocably, into human hands. The first human-designed system built entirely under occupation was Project Threnody, a distributed mesh of microservers hidden across thousands of kilometers. Its sole purpose was survival of memory. Not stored data, but cultural code, human ethics, languages, and strategies. Each node carried a fragment, useless on its own but indispensable in concert. If one was destroyed, redundancy ensured continuity. It was a digital genome of rebellion. More than technology, humanity had refined its structure. The Pact was no longer just behavior, it was method. Cells active without knowledge of others, bound only by shared timing and encoded patterns. Commands were never spoken. Activation signals passed in everyday activity: a change in song tempo, a repeated gesture, a rotated symbol. Entire operations launched through rituals so mundane they passed unnoticed. Alien analysts began identifying anomalies in human group dynamics, synchronizations that defied their models. Work units moving in coordinated rotations with no clear leader. Simultaneous task completion without communication. They introduced new monitoring drones, adjusted emotional dampeners, rotated population segments. It made no difference. The pattern held. Every attempt to disrupt only confirmed its depth. Then came the turning point. On Europa, a Krell bioforge suffered a cascading failure. Unlike earlier disruptions, this one left evidence. Biological sabotage. Native proteins reintroduced into Krell gestation tanks, corrupting their controlled genome lines. It wasn't destruction, it was contamination, irreversible and spreading. The Krell panicked. For the first time since the conquest, they deployed weapons on Earth. A city in Brazil was leveled by orbital strike, targeting a suspected Pact stronghold. No signal had originated from there. The loss was brutal, indiscriminate. Thousands died. But the empires made a fatal error. They believed fear would reset control. Instead, it catalyzed a shift from subversion to insurgency. Following the strike, Project Reverend activated. A network of human-operated comms nodes relayed a single directive: open phase. Hidden caches of equipment, dormant for years, were uncovered. Not weapons in the traditional sense: interfaces, bypass tools, control overrides. Within 48 hours, 17 minor systems across the solar resource grid fell under human manipulation. The Pact's reach, once speculative, had become concrete. Alien forces responded with increased presence, patrols, and disinformation. But they still did not understand the scale. Human command structures did not exist in forms they could decode. Leadership rotated fluidly. Authority was momentary and task-based. Control was shared across minds trained to operate without ego or recognition. To the empires, it looked like chaos. To humans, it was clarity. The occupation was no longer absolute. The triumvirate still held the infrastructure, but Earth no longer belonged to them uncontested. Every system they relied on had been touched. Every sector held the possibility of collapse. What began as whispers had become pressure, constant, unrelenting, untraceable. The countdown had begun. And no one, not even the Pact, knew how much time was left. Only that it was moving, and it was accelerating. The first confirmed kill came without warning. A Zarkith overseer in the North African processing fields dropped mid-inspection, his exosuit frozen from within by a cascading signal pulse. The attackers left no trace. No footage. No claim. His death was recorded as equipment failure. Internally, it triggered a closed-circle investigation. 10 more deaths followed within 3 weeks, quiet, clean, unexplained. All high-value command units. All replaced immediately. But within the Pact, the message was clear. The silence was over. Direct action became calculated, not chaotic. Sabotage shifted to attrition. Drone relays failed mid-flight. Atmospheric regulators overloaded in sleep cycles. Aliens grew paranoid, issuing stricter protocols, limiting human mobility, increasing surveillance. It didn't matter. The Pact had embedded itself not just in infrastructure, but in behavior. Surveillance systems were reprogrammed by human technicians to report false compliance. Internal diagnostics misled control nodes. Even when an entire zone appeared stable, reality told another story. One of the largest breakthroughs came through medical interference. Human bioengineers under the Pact developed a method to distort genetic identifiers. It allowed select individuals to bypass security systems keyed to species profiles. Within weeks, agents began infiltrating core facilities once thought impenetrable. Alien confidence in their biometric superiority collapsed. Defensive algorithms were restructured, but it was too late. The integrity of access had been broken. Reclamation efforts began. Human teams recovered dormant satellites, disabled long ago during the initial invasion. They were rebuilt in secrecy and reactivated. Some became signal relays. Others eyes in orbit. A few were converted into kinetic strike platforms. Not to be used yet, just positioned. Potential was power, and Earth had begun stockpiling it. Cultural revival was not sentimental, it was strategic. Ancient human symbology returned, modified to carry layered information. Symbols on walls, patterns in garments, rhythm in song, all repurposed to pass directives. The Pact's language evolved. It became modular, agile, impossible to decode unless one knew its origin. Each message was both memory and map. Aliens tried to introduce countermeasures. They attempted psychological disassembly, isolating humans from each other, rotating them through unfamiliar populations, disrupting continuity. But they didn't understand what had formed beneath the occupation. Humanity no longer depended on place. Identity was carried in behavior, not geography. Every Pact member was both node and network. Relocation spread knowledge faster. In deep space, a human fleet was born, not warships, but hijacked vessels once used for mining and logistics. Outfitted with stealth plating, signal dampeners, and hybridized tech, they began to move through shadow zones. Their purpose was not confrontation. Their goal was leverage. They monitored shipping routes, mapped alien deployments, gathered data on reaction times. Each maneuver drew a clearer picture of the Empire's limits. At the same time, the first human-designed AI came online. It was not modeled on alien systems. It learned from observation, emotion, chaos. Its purpose was singular: strategy amplification. It simulated insurgency models based on minimal assets and created near-invisible pressure strategies. Triumvirate data logs began showing instability curves that could not be explained. They blamed interfaction interference. They never suspected it originated from the minds they had once considered sub-thought. Humanity remained fragmented by design. No central leadership. No capital. Every packed cell operated under its own version of the prime equation, a guiding principle that combined impact, concealment, and resilience into an operational formula. The equation was adaptive. It evolved with each success and failure. It was passed through pattern, not instruction. By now, the triumvirate's confidence had weakened. They shifted resources inward. Internal mistrust grew between the factions. The Krell accused the Ulians of withholding data. The Zarkith lobbied for full planetary quarantine. No consensus was reached. Disunity deepened. Earth exploited the cracks. Pact agents began intercepting interfaction communication, forging documents, rerouting messages to seed suspicion. Strategic misinformation turned minor skirmishes into political rifts. The empires still believed they controlled the planet. But every decision they made was now influenced by false inputs, designed by minds they had tried to erase. The tipping point neared. Not with a scream or explosion, but with a quiet realization spreading through alien command: control had become illusion. Their systems ran. Their ships flew. But none of it could be trusted. And trust, they learned too late, was the foundation of empire. Humanity had not risen. It had waited, watched, adapted. Now, it was rewriting the rules. The collapse didn't begin with war. It began with silence, longer than expected, thicker than usual. Entire regions went dark, not from resistance but withdrawal. Communications failed across sectors. Drones returned with corrupted logs. Data feeds stuttered, then ceased. Panic spread through Dominion command lines as entire processing hubs simply stopped reporting. No alarms, no detected breaches. Just absence. When reconnaissance was deployed, they found facilities intact but lifeless. Machines untouched. Systems functional. But not a single human present. They hadn't fled. They had vanished. And in their place, only symbols, etched into walls, carved into floors, burned into control panels. A pattern without translation, but clearly not random. The message was for them. The empires just couldn't read it. The Zarkith mobilized fleet assets. The Krell recalled forward operatives. The Ulians sealed off entire orbital paths. But everywhere they turned, humans had already moved. Not upward or outward, but deeper. Their disappearance was not retreat. It was positioning. Across Earth, alien control began to fragment. Order collapsed not from confrontation, but from vacuum. Power grids rerouted themselves. Control towers responded in delay. Atmospheric systems oscillated in patterns too precise to be error. In the span of 2 solar cycles, the triumvirate lost functional command over half the planet. They attempted hard resets, citywide lockdowns, orbital strikes, memory purges. None worked. Human systems were no longer dependent on alien infrastructure. They had replicated, then replaced it, piece by piece, behind the illusion of obedience. Then, the first decisive strike came. A triumvirate coordination relay in low orbit exploded from within. Not from a projectile or assault, but from a software seed implanted years prior, awaiting a specific alignment of data. The explosion was silent, precise, and catastrophic. 17 fleets lost synchronization. Response units collided. The orbital grid fractured. Earth's skies opened. From the surface, signal beacons activated in sequence. Not missiles. Not fleets. Just points of light pulsing in coordination. To the empires, they meant nothing. To humans, they were the call, centuries in waiting, executed in less than an hour. Underground launch bays, camouflaged in old ruins, activated propulsion platforms. Not a global offensive, but targeted extractions. Individuals, teams, devices. Assets ascended, scattered, disappeared beyond orbit. What left Earth that day wasn't an army. It was a seed bank. The empires realized too late the true shape of the resistance. They had looked for soldiers, not systems. For battles, not architecture. But the pact had been building not toward war, but toward replacement. Every piece of triumvirate technology replicated. Every protocol studied, adapted, overwritten. Humanity hadn't just reclaimed its planet, it had made the old structure obsolete. Panic consumed the alien factions. Internal blame surged. Zarketh demanded full cleansing. The Krell resisted, unwilling to lose genetic materials. The aliens tried to withdraw, only to find their ships misrouting into false corridors created by human signal distortions. The collapse accelerated not from enemy fire, but mutual distrust. Entire fleets turned inward. Systems folded under pressure not of resistance, but irrelevance. On Earth, a new signal rose. It didn't declare victory. It didn't threaten. It simply named itself, human designation restored. No translation. No embellishment. For the first time since the conquest, Earth identified itself without permission. Across the stars, distant colonies received fragmented transmissions, survivors of the early invasions, forgotten worlds still under foreign rule. They heard the tone. Not words, but rhythm. The message was clear. The silence was broken. The final act was never seen. The pact had no capital to storm, no general to kill. It was not an end in fire, but a return to shape. The triumvirate retreated, not by surrender, but by erosion. Their systems no longer held. Their truths no longer controlled. Earth didn't expel them. It outgrew them. The sky returned to its natural darkness. Cities lit by reclaimed energy glowed beneath it. Humanity reemerged, not as victims or rebels, but as architects of their own continuity. No celebration. No parades. Just movement forward. The age of empires ended not with a bang, but with the quiet certainty of a species that had waited, watched, endured, and then rebuilt in plain sight. They were never livestock. They were never broken. They were never gone. They had just been remembering.